Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, November the 12th, 2024. So over the last few days I've been going on and on about American politics, and you might be bored by the subject. I actually think I'm pretty bored by the subject, at least for the moment, so I think we'll keep it simple in this video and just look at something uncontroversial, like Venus in Capricorn. Venus has recently moved into Capricorn, so it might be a good idea to consider what it actually means for Venus to be in Capricorn. And I will be looking at some horoscopes of some people and perhaps events who do have this placement. And you know, it's a fairly biased sample. It always is. These are example charts that I find interesting, but I think that they might help us, understand what it means for Venus to be in Capricorn. Anyway, before I look at the details of Venus in Capricorn, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, Tuesday, November the 12th. And as usual, I have to ask that if you like this video, I'd be really happy if you were to say that or indicate that you like this video by pressing the appropriate button. And if you're not subscribed, I would be really happy if you were to indeed subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does make a big difference to my channel, or so I'm told. Anyway, let's look at what's happening today. So here is a chart of today. New York chart set for noon on November the 12th. There, of course, is a goat. I think it's a mountain goat from Oregon. And there's a glyph of Venus, hence Venus in Capricorn. And as far as what this chart is about, well, we have the moon in Aries. And the moon is conjunct the North Node in Aries. So with the moon in Aries, it is very different from sort of moon in Pisces. Pisces is the water sign. Aries is a fire sign. Aries is a very dynamic sign. It is about action. And with moon in Aries, many of us may feel that it is time to make a start. So whatever we've been planning on doing, we can now get going on it. There's no time to waste. And so many of us might feel that it is just time to just take the initiative. And indeed, it might be the right thing to do, because the moon in Aries is conjunct the North Node. So the North Node is where we should be going. It's what we should aspire to. It represents our future. I mean, if you're into reincarnation, the North Node can represent future incarnations, as opposed to the South Node, which might represent the past, our previous incarnation. So in general, where we are supposed to be going at the moment is we are supposed to be doing things in a quite sort of fiery way. And we are supposed to be taking the initiative. And so just before the moon moves into Aries, for some of us, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, there may be a time when the moon is in Pisces. The moon is making a conjunction to Neptune. So beginning of the day, that is a possibility. So early on, there might be a sense of uncertainty, not quite sure where things are going. And then there is a change. So we start off with chaos, but then everything becomes crystal clear with moon in Aries, and we are fairly certain what needs to be done, what must be done. And the moon in Aries, it makes a square to Venus. Now that moon square Venus may represent a certain tension. Moon in Aries wants to make things happen. Venus in Capricorn maybe wants to hold back. Venus in Capricorn can be somewhat responsible, can be looking at the consequences of things, and there may be a little bit of uncertainty with that moon square Venus. And so perhaps we have to work it through. We have to act responsibly, but at the same time, there are things that actually have to be done. Also, Moon square Venus, you've got two fairly sensitive, sort of negative planets square each other. That can, in certain cases, represent a little bit of overindulgence, Moon square Venus, perhaps emotional overindulgence. So, I mean, it's not over the top because, it's not like we've got Moon or Venus in a water sign, but there can be a little bit of laziness, maybe in some quarters. It may feel that we know we have to do something, but we sort of hold back and we feel we can avoid the point or avoid the issue by just doing something else and wasting time. But that is not really the right thing to be doing. And Venus, by the way, is making a quintile to Saturn. So Venus and Saturn are 72 degrees apart, approximately. So that's 1/5 of a circle. So the quintile between Venus and Saturn might indicate that, some of us are trying our hardest to give the impression of being cool, calm, and collected, of trying not to show too much emotion, and giving impression that we're tough and we can be detached. It doesn't mean to say we are detached, but I think some of us might want to give the impression that we are detached, and we might actually go to great lengths to indicate that something doesn't bother us, that we can be emotionally aloof. I mean, it's a bit of an act, but some of us might regard that as being the right approach, the right way of dealing with the day's challenges. And it's not just Venus that's aspecting Saturn, it's Mercury. Mercury is making a square to Saturn, and you could argue that Mercury square Saturn is the most important aspect of the day. So, it is somewhat of a conflict, isn't it? You've got Mercury in Sagittarius square Saturn in Pisces. So, Mercury in Sagittarius likes to be free, likes to say what's on its mind, free spirit, but then it's square Saturn. There is a block, there is resistance. We can't do what we want to do. So how does that work out? Now, Mercury square Saturn may, in certain cases, be about negativity, because Mercury is about how we think, how we perceive things, and if it's square Saturn, we might sort of think that it's all too difficult, and it's mentally difficult. So if we're involved in mental tasks, it may be hard work, and we might take the view we can't understand things. On the other hand, Mercury square Saturn is encouraging us to use our brain, but in a very disciplined way. Really focus on something. Yeah, sure, to begin with, it won't make sense, but if we keep plugging away, things will eventually start to be clear. So that's perhaps a positive way of using Mercury square Saturn. There are negative ways of using Mercury square Saturn. If you see Saturn as just a straight malefic, I'm not saying one should treat it as a straight malefic, but if one were to treat it as a straight malefic, then Mercury square Saturn might be about the things we say. Yeah, some of us can say things that are very hurtful with Mercury square Saturn. I mean, you can even use bad language with Mercury square Saturn. So the question is, if you are tempted to use bad language or to put people down with your words, perhaps ask yourself why. It may be because you're projecting your frustrations. I mean, it may not be your frustrations. It may be that you're at the receiving end of someone else who is frustrated, because, this is not, at this stage, I'm not talking about particular signs. I'm talking about what the planets mean for everyone as a whole. And so Mercury square Saturn there are going to be temptations to lash out verbally if we feel, or if someone else feels, that things aren't going to plan. And that's the broad picture. I suppose the moon is making a trine to Mars, which is actually quite useful. Moon in Aries, trine Mars in Leo. That perhaps allows us to use our energy to get over whatever hurdles we might feel. But Moon trine Mars, like Mercury square Saturn, can potentially lash out verbally. Moon square Mars can be particularly angry, but Moon trine Mars, maybe it's just a little bit easy to get angry, and that can be represented in a verbal way. But perhaps we with this Moon trine Mars, we just need to see it in its best possible light and see it as about being spontaneous and making things happen. Now, that's a picture in New York, moon at 6 degrees Aries. So certainly if you're in the Americas, it's an Aries day. If you're in the UK, for example, the moon moves into Aries at 6:26 a.m. So that means in the UK, and I think for Europe and Africa, pretty much the whole day has the moon in Aries. As you go east, then the influence of moon in Pisces gets stronger and stronger. More of the day, more of the morning is covered by moon in Pisces. So if we look at the picture in Sydney, Australia at noon, we can see that at noon in Sydney, Australia, being a representative of Australia and New Zealand, the moon is at 26 Pisces. So in fact, in Sydney, Australia, the moon doesn't actually move into Pisces until this evening. And in Sydney, in New Zealand, it will really move into the moon will move into Aries this evening, and in New Zealand it will just move into Aries just even later. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then for much of the day the moon is going to be in Pisces rather than Aries. So there is going to be a slightly different emphasis, and you're perhaps going to pick up more on the fact that the moon is making a conjunction to Neptune. So there is that sense of confusion and uncertainty before you're ready and able to actually take action. But of course, the moon will eventually move into Aries, and if you are in Australia and New Zealand or Vladivostok, for example, then by tomorrow, don't worry, the moon will be in Aries and it will be time to get things moving. Then there is the heliocentric picture, looking at things from the perspective of the sun and putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And there is a chart. And I'm not saying that anything particularly dramatic is going on. Mercury is semi-sextile Saturn. Now, that Mercury semi-sextile Saturn, in a way, it supports the Mercury square Saturn. So geocentrically, we have Mercury square Saturn. Heliocentrically, we have Mercury semi-sextile Saturn. So today there is a real Mercury-Saturn feel, and it just may feel that it is difficult to express ourselves at times, at least in a verbal sense. And because of that difficulty, we might feel we have to exaggerate. That might be why we use bad language, because we're almost lashing out. And Mercury-Saturn, it might be about perceptions and cognitions, and it is about the mind. And so for some of us, we might have passing negativity. We might think that something is not possible. It's just too difficult. The obstacles are too great. And it's just important that we don't get overwhelmed by that feeling. It's a situation where we need to really work it through and be prepared to put in the work and give ourselves time to work things out. We can't expect instant solutions, and it does require patience, but at the same time we've got to have the self-confidence perhaps to try things out. Mercury Saturn might say, well, there's no point, but then Moon is in Aries. Moon is in Aries trine Mars. And so with Moon in Aries trine Mars, it is a time when we can make things happen if we believe in ourselves. So if that's the main thing happening heliocentrically, we've also got, I suppose, Earth is Mercury. See, Mercury is not just making a semi-sextile to Saturn. Mercury is starting to make a square to the Earth. So with Mercury square the Earth, I suppose the issue of communications is going to be important, and also the issue of a lack of communication. So being able to say what's on our mind is going to be important, and if we can't say what's on our mind, we will perhaps take it to heart, and we have to sort of get the balance right. Anyway, there's not a huge amount going on heliocentrically, so it's now time to look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, November the 12th, 2024. Aries. The moon is now in your sign, and I think that is something very much to be welcomed. It's now a time when you can start moving forward. I think that recently you may have felt that there were obstacles, there were reasons why you couldn't get things done, and now you're starting to see things in a different way. You're seeing what really is possible. And the moon is not just in Aries, but it's making a conjunction to the North Node in Aries. And so you perhaps need to ask yourself, what is the right thing to do? And the right thing to do, Aries, is to act, which is exactly what Aries is all about. It is a sign which is about taking the initiative. So if there's something you feel needs to be done, then now might be the time. In fact, probably now is the time. And you're helped by the fact that the moon is making a trine to Mars. That moon trine Mars is very dynamic. Remember, Mars is in Leo, which is a fire sign. It's a sign that has a great affinity with your own sign. Mars is in mutual reception with the Sun, because the Sun and Mars, Sun in Scorpio, Mars in Leo, Sun and Mars are in each other's signs. So that's good. So don't think too hard about it. Just make it happen. Now, just because you are ready to take action doesn't necessarily mean to say that other people are going to take the same view. It may be the case that, at least to begin with, you don't actually get much support. People might come up with all sorts of reasons why something can't be done or why something is impossible. And you may be dealing with other people's basic inertia, and maybe they just want things to happen the way they always have happened, and they don't want to move on. And if that's the way it is, then what can you do? You just have to do what you feel is right. And I think that if you're dynamic and self-sufficient, I don't see what can get in your way. Though I should say that if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, then the moon doesn't really get going in Aries until tomorrow. I mean, not seriously. And I mean, okay, it might be this evening, but it's going to be quite late in the day. So if you are in Australia and New Zealand, then for much of the day, perhaps all of the day, you're going to just feel that now is not quite the right time. And you may feel that you need to hold back, that you're still not ready. And that's okay. I mean, I think there may be things you need to work through. There may be things that are undermining you in a short-term way because the moon is making a conjunction to Venus. Again, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, East Asia, and the picture may not be clear enough to really seriously take the initiative, but don't worry. By tomorrow, the moon will most certainly be in Aries and things can really start moving again. And in a general sense, Aries, you are able to create a good impression. And not everyone is going to be impressed by that, I suppose. But that doesn't matter because you're able to make a good impression with enough people, or at least you're going to be able to start to create a good impression. Because Venus is now in Capricorn, and Venus, in many respects, at least for you, does work quite well in Capricorn. It's about you and your image, and you giving the impression that you know what you're doing, and you're able to present yourself in the right way, at least in a public sense. But as far as good impression is concerned, you can't expect that impression, which is good. I mean, you are presenting yourself very well, but you cannot expect everyone to be on board with you at the moment, because as I said at the beginning of this piece, some people are not in the mood for change. And if you are pushing a change, and if you want something to happen, not everyone is going to like that. And they may want to sort of look the other way or just ignore you. But I don't think that situation is going to last so very long. And I suppose there is a certain amount of choice here. You are quite dynamic at the moment. Moon moving into Aries, moon making a trine to Mars. You can force the pace, and you can force people to take notice of you. And in the end, I do think that you should be able to get your way. Taurus, you are in a situation where you feel that things are a little bit up in the air, and you're wondering whether it's really the right time to do whatever you're planning on doing. I think, yeah, sure, there are things you'd like to do, but you have your concerns. You're perhaps thinking that there are things that you just need to work through, and Taurus, remember, is a fixed sign, and so you can be a little bit stuck in your ways, and that is something that really could hold you back. So the question is, how should you be addressing this whole issue? What actually should you be doing? Well, Taurus, I don't think that you should allow yourself to be pressurized. It is a little bit of a high pressure day because we've got the moon moving into Aries. The moon is making a trine to Mars. So there is pressure perhaps for people to do stuff, to sort of reveal their hand, to take the initiative. But I don't think you need to be part of that. I think that you can sort of shrink away if need be. So you can almost sort of avoid the issue. So other people might want to address the issue directly, whatever that issue might be. But you can be ignored if you want to be ignored. And I know it's not nice to be ignored usually, but sometimes there are advantages in being ignored. When you're being ignored, you can get your way because no one knows what you're doing. No one asks questions about what you're doing. So, Taurus, you can quietly get on with whatever you would like to be doing without really being disturbed. And I think that that might actually be quite useful, because if you are doing things on your own, in your own way, then you're able to discover new things about yourself and discover new things about what you can do. And it's actually possible that you might surprise yourself. You might surprise yourself in terms of what you're able to do. You might have thought that something was impossible, and when you actually try it out, when you put a bit of work into it, you're surprised that actually it does work out, that you've got an ability perhaps that maybe you didn't know you had. And so that perhaps is an advantage of not having to worry too much about outside pressure, because when there's no pressure, you can work on yourself and you can experiment and you can think about, where everything is going. And it's very important, I think, Taurus, at the moment, to have a broader perspective, and a broader perspective in terms of what you yourself are able to do. But if you get the chance, and you may get the chance, if you get the chance to show off, to show what you can do, then I think it's very important that you avail yourself of this opportunity. I'm not saying that chance is necessarily going to happen, but you've got to be open-minded. I don't think it's a time, for example, Taurus, to have rigid, fixed plans, because if you have rigid, fixed plans about what's going to happen today, then sure, you can go through those fixed plans. It may be fine, but it will mean that you may miss out on some opportunities. A change of schedule can actually work in your favor. So don't be too stubborn. And if you can deal with a little bit of uncertainty in your life over the course of the day, I do think that would actually be very useful. Now, another side of what's happening today, in terms of, if you happen to be with other people in particular, is, we do have this Venus quintile Saturn. And, Venus quintile Saturn is the deliberate attempt to be disciplined. And it's somewhat contrived. Now, too much discipline today is certainly not a good thing, because if you're too disciplined, if you're too planned, then, Taurus, you're going to miss out on opportunities. At the same time, giving the impression that you're disciplined and that you're focused, even if privately that's not the case, might actually be a good idea. So perhaps you need to sort of manage the impression you're giving. So if you do have to deal with people, just perhaps make a special effort to be very focused and organized, and perhaps not too emotional. I don't think excessive emotion is going to benefit anyone today. And if you give the impression of being quite cool, I think that will be appreciated. But it is just an impression, and I think it's an impression which can certainly be useful. But you don't necessarily want to believe your own impression. So you might, for example, give the impression of being serious and disciplined, but at the same time, you've got to have that flexibility and indeed spontaneity, just in case something happens which you may be able to take advantage of. And yes, as I've already said, have plans, but don't make those plans too fixed, because if those plans are too fixed, they may just prevent you from just taking advantage of what might be a wonderful opportunity. So do look out for that opportunity, and if need be, you might have to go out of your way to take advantage of it. And perhaps you really had planned to do something today at a particular time, and maybe that time has to be postponed because something comes up. Gemini, the big aspect today is a square between Mercury and Saturn. And I think that Mercury-Saturn aspect is very likely to have an impact on you. Now, Mercury square Saturn is not a bundle of laughs, really, because, there's Mercury, that's you, trying to be yourself, trying to express yourself, and then Saturn comes along. And Saturn can really close you down. It can squelch you, and it can lead to a certain amount of negativity. Geminis can get negative. They perhaps can overthink things, and they can overthink things to the point where they think that something is a waste of time. And so if something starts to not go your way, then you may take this seriously. You may take this too seriously. And you may regard this as being so serious that you perhaps are tempted to give up on something that is actually very important to you. So a modicum of optimism really does matter. And somehow, if you do run into trouble, if you run into a big obstacle, you should not see it as the end of the world. Instead, you should see this as perhaps something that was inevitable. You can't keep going in the same direction without any struggle, without any resistance. At some point, there's always some resistance. But, once you do hit the first obstacle, you might just give up. I mean, that is a possibility, but I don't think it need happen. And so perhaps you need to start this day being mindful that nothing is going to be easy. I mean, if things are easy, that would be great. But once things start becoming difficult, once you start having sort of negative thoughts, then you need to tell yourself that this is absolutely normal. This is not a surprise. It's nothing to be upset about. It's just a challenge. So that I think is a way to go about it. And these kind of challenges can come from many directions. It may be, for example, that some people are just being unhelpful. You just don't get the enthusiasm and encouragement you were expecting. If you are dealing with people who are authority figures, who have more power than you, or perhaps you perceive them as having more wisdom than you, but at least in a temporary sense, then it's very easy for these people to overwhelm you. And so negative feedback could really hit you. So you have an idea, there's something you want to do, you tell someone about it, and you're told something you don't want to hear. Now, it may well be that you're being told something useful, you're being given good advice, but I think it's more likely that certain people are just going to be negative for the sake of it, and they may have a point, but I don't think it's helpful. So perhaps, Gemini, you should be very careful about getting feedback, particularly about something that is important to you, because you may be devastated by the wrong feedback. If you're told that something is very important to you, that you're told that you're wasting your time, you're going to take it to heart. You might even give something up. So be careful and don't be too critical in terms of being self-critical, and don't allow other people to be too critical. Don't give them a chance. And if you are feeling frustrated today, which you could do with Mercury square Saturn, if you feel that things are not working out, there is a little bit of a danger that you project that frustration, and you, for example, might be quite cruel, or at least cutting, in what you have to say. Gemini is a very verbal sign. Gemini can say things which could be upsetting, and with Mercury square Saturn, I think it's absolutely possible that you say things which you very quickly regret, and you just lash out with your words. So that is something that could happen. So given all of this, you perhaps need to be careful who you associate with and what you talk about. Maybe you shouldn't talk about things that are very precious to you. Don't talk about your plans. Talk about other people's plans, because handle it in the right way, and it can actually be quite a pleasant day. Certainly from a social point of view, we've got the moon in Aries, we've got the moon conjunct North Node in Aries. In fact, we've got the moon square Mars. So it can be a day which is very sociable. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that might be more about tomorrow, but tomorrow, it can be very sociable for you, and people can be friendly, but just make sure that you keep it light, and try not to talk about your plans. I mean, I know Geminis sometimes like to talk about themselves and talk about what is interesting to them and what's important to them, but I think any socializing has to, in terms of what's going on, it needs to be about other people, and your own material, I think, should be kept to yourself, because I think that would be the best way to avoid arguments, and also to avoid criticism. Because I know criticism is useful, but I think that today you don't want to put yourself in a position where you might be criticized, simply because I think you might not take any criticism too well. I think you might react quite negatively to it, and it could end up being quite destructive. Cancer, we have the moon moving into Aries, and obviously every month moon moves into Aries, and to an extent I say fairly similar things when moon moves into Aries. I hope I'm not sort of repetitive here, but with the moon moving into Aries, Cancer, it is a time to get noticed. It's not a time to be sort of shying away from things, because you've most certainly got something to offer. And of course, every time the moon moves into Aries, it makes a conjunction to the North Node, and so it's just a reminder that this is a time when you have to be clear, you have to be assertive, and you shouldn't be afraid of being noticed. And it can be a time where Cancerians can be leaders. Leaders, in the sense that perhaps other people don't know what to do, they're not sure what to do, but actually you're pretty certain about it, and you've almost certainly understood the situation correctly. So Cancer, don't hold back, although I understand there is a temptation to not get involved. I think if you were to sort of follow the line of least resistance, you wouldn't get involved. You would just stick to your own company and not do anything dangerous, not take any social risks, but that's not really the right approach. I mean, if you try too hard to isolate yourself, then somehow the reverse actually happens, because you're always going to be impacted by what's happening in the outside world. It's always going to happen. But if you feel that you can retreat, then what's happening is that you're giving up control. The outside world does its own thing, and then it makes itself felt by you, but in a way that you don't understand, that you don't appreciate. It's so much better if you are in the midst of things right from the beginning, because once you're in the midst of things, once you're with people, you're able to, take on a position of leadership perhaps. You're able to comment on things, you're able to make your position clear, and so in that way you are in control. And the moon in Aries is making a trine to Mars. Moon trine Mars is a very useful and very dynamic aspect, Cancer, and it says that you really can assert yourself and be dynamic, and you can also get your way. You can get your way in a number of areas, but I'm thinking particularly about money. Mars is in Leo. It's in mutual reception to the Sun, and Leo is a sign which in the Cancer horoscope can be financially orientated. And so if there's something you want of a financial nature, or you feel that something needs to be sorted out financially, I think that you can make your opinions felt in no uncertain terms. And I think that in most cases people are going to listen to you. Now, as far as other people are concerned, as far as relationships are concerned, we can't avoid the fact that Mercury is making a square to Saturn, and Saturn as a planet does have a special connection with relationships in the Cancerian chart. And with Mercury square Saturn, you have to think about what other people are saying and what other people are communicating. And I think it's actually important not to take it to heart. People may say things for a number of different reasons. And just because someone says something that appears offensive or insensitive or ill-judged doesn't necessarily mean that you should judge them harshly. And so, Cancer, it might be a good idea to sort of use your knowledge of human nature to understand why people say what they say. Of course, it's not just about the spoken word, it can be about the written word. It's what people say in text messages or email or in internet comments, whatever. Don't necessarily take it to heart, and don't judge someone because in the first instance you're not really going to know why they say it. But when you think about it again, when you use your sensitivity, I think it will become clearer. So don't judge people on what they say. I do think that is quite important. And it may be that you have to make a special effort to listen to what someone is saying, or what people in general are saying. It may be hard to listen, but if you listen hard, if you listen intently, then I think the words will start to make sense. But fundamentally, Cancer, the day should be about you and what you are bringing to bear in terms of the world, because you have got something to offer, and one of the things you have got to offer is common sense, and I think you've got leadership to offer as well. So do be ready to accept this responsibility, because let's face it, we are living in difficult times. All of us are living in difficult times. A lot of people are confused, they're upset, they don't know where things are going. And, as a Cancerian, your job is perhaps to make things easier, to make things less complicated. And by showing a sort of a clear example, I think that you can be making other people's lives easier. Leo. Leo, we have the moon moving into Aries, and moon moving into Aries is something to be welcomed. Moon moving into a fire sign, it's making a trine to Mars. Of course, Mars is in Leo, and so I think that with that moon trine Mars, that makes you dynamic and also quite open-minded. I think that you understand that there are many things going on. There are many things to understand. There isn't just one way of doing things. There are actually several ways of doing things, and you perhaps need to be open to everything that is possible. And it may be that if you are sufficiently open-minded, you can start to see solutions. You might have thought that there were no solutions, that it was all a big battle and nothing could be ever achieved in a really satisfactory way unless you had some huge sort of conflict. And now you perhaps should understand that you are able to make things happen, and it's just important to have a sense of a wider vision, that actually goes beyond any short-term concerns and frustrations. Now, talking about frustrations, the sun is your ruler, and if you look at the chart, you will notice that Saturn and Pluto are approximately 42 degrees apart. And yes, you've got Saturn in Pisces and you've got Pluto in Capricorn. And so the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto is going to be around 20 Aquarius. And the sun is at noon in New York is at 21 Aquarius. So what that means is that the sun, your ruler, is square the Saturn-Pluto midpoint. So, what does Saturn-Pluto mean? I mean, Saturn-Pluto is about frustration. It can be about frustration. But it can also be about power and the awareness that power is important. I mean, Saturn-Pluto can be about feeling that you have to assert enormous power in order to get your way. Or you might feel that you're dealing with powerful people, powerful situations, which can be a little bit overwhelming. And I think that with the sun aspecting or square the Saturn-Pluto midpoint, there is a sense in which you are dealing with big events and there are serious things going on and you do feel pressurized, and at the same time you kind of want to break free, but it's really, really hard work. I don't know, with Saturn Pluto you could think about concrete and broken concrete, a concrete wall, and how does that concrete wall get shattered? And it can't be shattered gradually. It either has to be just accepted or it has to be smashed in one blow. Now, I'm not advocating that you take these kind of huge actions out of, I don't know, whether it's out of frustration or whatever, but I think it's just important, Leo, that you understand some of the pressures that you might be under. And it's not just the pressures that you're under, it's perhaps what other people are under, but also you don't exaggerate them. Because, Sun square the Saturn-Pluto midpoint, the Sun does move 1 degree a day. The Sun will move off the Saturn-Pluto midpoint, it's just that right now you just might feel that you're rather hemmed in, and that you're not going to be able to free yourself if you don't do something dramatic. But on a positive note, as I said, the moon is in Aries, the moon is trine Mars, and Mars is in Leo, and that suggests to me that in a natural, organic way, you can make things happen. You can free yourself if you feel that you're hemmed in. There is a way to find freedom, and there is a way to assert yourself in a very smooth flowing way, and you don't have to make a big drama about it. And perhaps the real key to today is not getting fixated on a single approach, a single problem, or a single solution. Because Leo is a fixed sign. Leo can get a little bit fixated, but if you consider the possibility that there are many ways to achieve the same thing, then, well, it won't take long, I don't think, before you find the right way. Because, the right way is available. If you just you look hard enough and you're open-minded enough, there may actually be today some kind of eureka moment where you realize that there is a solution, that what you thought was an insoluble problem, there's a way around it. And if you can just have a bit of flexibility and open-mindedness, I think you'll find a path through. Virgo, probably the main aspect today is a square aspect between Mercury and Saturn. Certainly the main aspect as far as you are concerned. And so Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury kind of represents you and represents what's going on in your life, and it represents your priorities. And so we have to look carefully at what Mercury is doing, and Mercury making a square to Saturn. And so with Mercury square Saturn, there is a possibility that you might feel a certain sense of frustration, that you can't do what you want to do. And there is then the question of how you respond to the first hurdle. So when you hit a problem, what do you do next? So your first inclination might be to just hold your ground. Just be perhaps quite stubborn about it. You just stay where you are, and you resist, and you perhaps hope that if you hold your ground for long enough, the issue will go away. But what might happen then is you just get increasingly stuck. You're just dealing with something that just won't go away. It may be a clash between you and another person. That is absolutely possible, because Saturn is in Pisces, Saturn is in your opposite sign, so that might be another person just presenting you with issues that you don't want to deal with. You can't escape from them, or you might be just dealing with someone's personality. Some people are stubborn, and you can be stubborn as well. So perhaps you're dealing with two stubborn people, nothing much going on, and little chance of compromise. And in a way, it would be easier if one party was weaker than the other. Because if one party was weaker than the other, in the end, someone would have to back down. But maybe this is not a situation where anyone will back down. I mean, Mercury is not without its strengths. Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter, and so that suggests to me that you don't feel you want to give away anything. You don't want to compromise. But at the same time, the situation you're dealing with has its own strengths, and particularly if it's a person, you're dealing with a person who is not necessarily weak. And so this could be a rather insoluble situation. And it may not be about another person. It just may be about an organization, or just a situation where no one moves, no one has the power to see it through. And I suppose you've got two animals. I remember a long time ago, I was in a hotel room in India, and there was a battle between a gecko and it was some large insect. And the insect, maybe it was a cockroach, I can't remember what it was, or something big, but I forget what the gecko was trying to eat, but the gecko couldn't do it. But the thing it was trying to eat was just not strong enough to escape. But the gecko was not strong enough to eat this thing, and so this battle, I think, went on all night. I saw it started in the evening, and the next morning it was still going on. And so that could be the situation that you might be in. And so perhaps what needs to happen is that you need to think outside the box. That's all you need to happen. And just remember, Mercury is in mutual reception to Jupiter. And so Mercury being in mutual reception to Jupiter is just about casting a problem in a different light. And as soon as you cast a problem in a different light, everything changes. And you can see a solution. And it's probably not about winners and losers. It's just about you going somewhere different, and perhaps just the battle in the end appearing to be completely irrelevant. And what were you fighting about in the first place, and what were you arguing about in the first place? And while this is happening, the moon is moving into Aries, and from a Virgo perspective, the moon moving into Aries, I think that you're perhaps beginning to realize that some things are more serious than you'd expected, and they do need some thought, and you perhaps should demand that certain things are taken seriously. Perhaps you actually see that there are things that have been trivialized, and you realize that they're not trivial, and you perhaps feel that you need to communicate this, that everyone needs to gather around, take something seriously, and find solutions. And you're quite resilient about this, and you believe that is important. And I think that is the right path for you. Moon conjunct the North Node in Aries. It's about accepting that nothing is simple, and being ready to take the initiative to go deep down into things and to ask questions. And yeah, it is a time when Virgos have got lots of things to ask, and some of the things you ask are complicated because you realize that things aren't simple, and you perhaps need to force people to really sort of get to the bottom of things. And maybe this relates back to this sort of conflict that you had, or potential for conflict between you and another person or another organization or whatever. It just may be fundamentally that something is being trivialized, and you just know it's being trivialized. And as far as you're concerned, it's unacceptable for something to be trivialized. And with a serious approach, you can really start to make progress. And it may well be that in terms of your own power, you make a special effort to be serious, to be the one who is intense because you're saying this is not a trivial matter. We all need to take this seriously. And perhaps it's not a time for smiling. It's not a day for smiling. Even if you feel like smiling, it's not a day for smiling, because in a way smiling is going to weaken you just by a serious, gritty approach, and also sort of having a sort of fairly sort of no-nonsense view, and perhaps trying to be the adult in the room. Perhaps that's a way of taking control of things, Virgo. Libra. We have the moon moving from Pisces to Aries, and that can always make a difference. Aries is cardinal sign, and it's opposite Libra, your sign. And so with the moon moving from Pisces to Aries, there can be potentially a change of focus, and many Librans may find that they are having to focus on other people, perhaps, the various relationships in your life, and just being aware of how other people can influence you. I mean, it's nice to be in control, but sometimes you have to accept that other people have their way of doing things, and you can't just ignore them. And so with the moon moving into Aries, and in fact the moon making a conjunction to the North Node in Aries, it is a time when you do need to sort of get the balance right. On one hand, you have to accept other people's existence and accept other people's influence, but you have to also respect your own desire for freedom and autonomy. And it is a difficult balance, but I think it's a balance that you can get it right. And I think that, it's important to make your choices. You don't have to be everyone's friend. Some people are useful, other people are not so useful. And the moon, when it moves into Aries, it makes a trine to Mars, and that trine to Mars, I think, is going to be about you being able to express who you are, but allowing other people to express who they are as well. And it may relate to particular people who are strongly placed, but just because they're strongly placed doesn't mean they're a problem. I think that Moon-Mars trine does perhaps indicate that you're able to benefit from another person, the right person. There are plenty of people who you, as I've said, who you won't benefit from, but there are certainly people out there who you can benefit from. And in terms of relationships, if you're involved with someone, you may see a new and more dynamic side to their personality, and that's perhaps something you can encourage. So, don't necessarily assume that just because someone is behaving in a particular way and they want to do things in a particular way, just don't assume that that's necessarily the whole picture, and don't assume that you can't have an impact. By interacting with someone, you can actually have an influence. You can change them. I mean, okay, people's personalities are difficult to change. I'm talking about something more short term. You can perhaps persuade them to do something, or you can perhaps bring out the best in them. And if you bring out the best in another person, in a way you're bringing out the best in yourself, because there can be, constructive feedback. And at the same time, Libra, it's a time when you absolutely mustn't doubt yourself, because, I've talked about you being able to bring out the best in other people, them being able to bring out the best in you. But the best in you, that is very important, because at the moment, it seems that there are things you can do which are really quite special, and you've got abilities which are absolutely appropriate for the current situation we are in. It may be a challenging times for all of us. But, when you've got challenges, you've got to use what you have. You've got to use your resources, and your resources are available. And you just might have an ability that perhaps you've taken for granted, or you hadn't taken it seriously. And quite surprisingly, you find you're good at something. So perhaps, Libra, you need to try lots of things out today. And don't doubt yourself. Don't think you can't do something. Maybe something hadn't worked out in the past, but that was because the situation wasn't right. But now the situation is right, Libra. And I think that you will find that, yes, you can make things happen. And the reason you can make things happen because it's because of your own skills. And perhaps we're dealing with a situation where we're dealing with dormant skills that just haven't had an opportunity, hadn't had a need to express themselves, but the right situation comes up, and suddenly, Libra, you find that you are a bit of an expert. Now, one thing I should say, Libra, is that Mercury is making a square to Saturn, and Mercury is in Sagittarius, and Mercury in Sagittarius can be about the way you talk, the words you use, the words you choose to use. And with Mercury square Saturn, it may be that sometimes the things you say don't quite hit the right note. Now, that might be because you feel you shouldn't say something, in which case the words are not just hitting the wrong note, they're not even existing, which is in a way you could say even worse. But there's just a sense in which there's a little bit of clumsiness in terms of what you say. And because of this clumsiness, you just might say something inappropriate that you didn't mean to say. And the words just come out, and it perhaps, Libra, you notice something. And you feel you need to comment on it. You feel you absolutely must comment on it. But sometimes you notice something, you comment on it, and it doesn't work out. Perhaps you offend someone. Perhaps you've just misunderstood it. You notice something, you think you understand it, and you say it, and clearly you've got it wrong. So if you feel you need to make an observation, and particularly if it's a critical observation, then it may be best not to say anything. Let the situation develop. It may be what you're worrying about is just not important. Of course, sometimes you will notice something that is perhaps really important, could be safety critical, someone's about to make a mistake, something needs to be corrected, and it could be very important. And yeah, sure, in that situation, yeah, you've got to be open and honest. But I think the things that are not absolutely critical, it may be just best to hold back. Scorpio, you possibly feel that you need to work out what is going on, and it may be that just things are just not clear. I mean, you'd like them to be clear, but they're not clear. And before you can do anything, you have to clarify the situation. And under those circumstances, you probably should just get on with it in your own way. Just work it out. And perhaps ask questions, but perhaps you don't have to ask questions at all. You can see that something needs to be resolved, something needs to be sorted out. It could require a bit of work, but that's something you can do. And perhaps also the less said, the better. Yeah, I think the less said, the better. If you're advertising yourself, you're talking about your intentions, you're talking about what you're doing, then it's actually quite possible that a lot of time could be wasted, especially now when in some respects other people could be disappointing. You have high hopes that other people are going to perhaps cooperate with you, are going to understand you, but I'm not convinced that anything much is going to happen. You have to understand that some people are stubborn and they're resistant to change, and they want things to carry on forever. Of course, nothing carries on forever, but some people want to carry on with things for as absolutely as long as they possibly can, and I don't think there's much you can do about it. So, Scorpio, if you feel that something needs to be done, then just do it yourself, because I don't think much help is going to be available. And perhaps it's better that way, because the advantage of doing things yourself is that you do things your way, and you do things to perfection. At least you do things to perfection in terms of how you see perfection. So, yeah, do it your way, and that, in that sense, things will resolve themselves. And also, of course, when several people involve themselves in a task, it can just it can make a mess. What do they say? Too many cooks can spoil the broth. I think that is very much the case today. And when people think they understand each other, they don't understand each other, and they can make a complete mess of things. But on a positive note, the moon is making a trine to Mars, and I think that moon trine Mars is going to be useful, and I think it's going to certainly help you in terms of you achieving your ambitions, whatever those ambitions might be. And it goes back to you doing things that are important, doing things that you regard as important, probably not getting anyone else's help. You just do it, and you do it with considerable enthusiasm. I mean, you might not start off being enthusiastic, but the more you do something, the more enthusiastic you get, and in the end, you've accomplished a huge amount. And yeah, in the end, people will notice. They might not notice today, but in the end, they will notice, I think, what you have actually managed to do. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I've perhaps already suggested that relationships might not be an area of great satisfaction at the moment. I think it's because just people are too set in their ways. Even people close to you, they just want things to stay the same. And I don't think you do want things to stay the same today. You have a clear idea about the way things should be moving. You, as far as you're concerned, things haven't been perfect in the past, and you want to make adjustments. And yeah, to begin with, you make the adjustments in your own way. And I just think at a later stage, people will follow. They'll realize that you were right all along. But today, to an extent, it may be a somewhat solitary path. And I should mention, Scorpio, that Venus is starting to make a quincunx to Mars. So Venus is at around 1 degree Capricorn. Mars is at 2 degrees 38 Leo. So Venus and Mars are in a 150 degree aspect, and over the next couple of days, that Venus quincunx Mars aspect is going to be exact, and it may remind you that you and some other people don't see things the same way. That doesn't mean to say you're incompatible, but there is work to be done. Because if you don't see things the same way, then something has to change. It may be that there's a resolution to the issue, where no one has to compromise, where no one has to back down. But I'll be talking about that Venus quincunx Mars in more detail probably tomorrow or the day after. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, the moon is changing sign. It's moving from Pisces to Aries. And I think that sign change does work in your favour. With the moon moving into Aries, moon moving into a fire sign, that's just what Sagittarius wanted. Sagittarius is a fire sign. In a way, the more planets in fire signs, the better. So, with moon moving out of Pisces into Aries, you're moving from a situation with moon in Pisces, where you may have felt that not much was going on, where perhaps you had to hold your ground, where you kind of didn't want to take risks, perhaps, and that's a little bit uncharacteristic for a Sagittarius, but there was a certain caution there. And the moon moves into Aries, and you start to warm up a bit. I mean, with the moon moving into a fire sign, and you start to see what is possible. And when the moon moves into Aries, it makes a trine to Mars, and so suddenly, Sagittarius, you do become a lot more dynamic, and you're in a situation where you feel that you can start to initiate things, and you can be enthusiastic. People very much appreciate Sagittarius's enthusiasm, and perhaps that enthusiasm has been missing over the last few days or even the last few weeks, but that enthusiasm is back in town. And so by showing your enthusiasm for what's happening, what's going on, what you can do, what other people can do, people are going to really like that. And you're going to be, I think, quite a motivating force. And you can give people ideas, and at the same time you'll be aware of something that you really want to do. I think there is one thing you really want to do. Perhaps in the past you'd thought that you couldn't do it, or the time wasn't right, but now I think the time is right. And perhaps it's also a seasonal thing, as we start to move into the Sagittarius season. Okay, I understand that Venus has moved out of Sagittarius, but Mercury is in Sagittarius. Soon enough, the Sun will be in Sagittarius. So the Sagittarius season is still there, and I think it's going to get stronger with the Sun moving into Sagittarius. And so it is a time when you need to think about the things that you can do of something you want to do, and it can happen, and it's just so important that you don't doubt yourself, and that also you can cut through other people's doubts, because not everyone is enthusiastic. People do appreciate your enthusiasm, but that doesn't mean to say that they can completely take it on board. Especially today when you've got Mercury making a square to Saturn. So, Mercury is in Sagittarius, and Mercury in Sagittarius perhaps represents other people to an extent being reliant on you, maybe, or looking to you for something. And Mercury's square Saturn may indicate people or a person who has a low opinion of themselves, who is negative, who doesn't think anything can happen, doesn't think there's a point. And perhaps, Sagittarius, you can actually do something to change the situation. You can perhaps cheer someone up. But you have to do it in a positive way. You can't just cheer someone up. It's always a bit of a problem, that concept of cheering someone up, because it seems a bit vague. But perhaps you can cheer someone up with a promise, or by showing them what is possible, because people need possibilities. And who better to show people what can be done than you? And Mercury, yeah, it might be square Saturn, but it's also in mutual reception to Jupiter. So that we've got this Mercury mutual reception until the beginning of next year. And so with Mercury in mutual reception to Jupiter, with Mercury square Saturn, it seems that for many people you are the solution. And so Sagittarius, when you look at the world around you and when you look at how it occurs to you, don't assume that that's always the way it has to be. Just because some people are unenthusiastic, just because some people are negative, just doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. And you can be the person that changes everything. And so look around you. Who's negative? Who's down in the dumps? And what can you do to change things? I think you can do a lot to change things. And perhaps that is your responsibility. And maybe your responsibility is to show your enthusiasm for yourself. And by showing how enthusiastic you are about yourself, that can actually encourage people to be enthusiastic about themselves. So, Sagittarius, you could say that you've got quite a lot of responsibilities today, but your responsibilities are pleasant responsibilities. It's making the world brighter and happier. Capricorn, it may be a time, Capricorn, where you feel that you have to take things quite seriously, that you can't just scatter your resources. Indeed, you can't allow other people to scatter your resources, and you've got to, concentrate on what is important and not be tempted to be sort of here, there, and everywhere. You can't be in lots of different places at once. You have to decide where you need to be. I don't think this is a day for excessive traveling, for excessive variety. Just concentrate on what matters. And you also are aware that, things are a bit serious, and there are serious things that need to be thought about and perhaps discussed. But the question is, how do you think about them? How do you discuss them? Because, we do have Mercury square Saturn. So there are a number of ways of looking at that Mercury square Saturn. There is you, Saturn. It's square Mercury. Mercury is about thinking. It's about discussing. So that's what you want to do. You certainly want to think. You want to talk. But whatever you want to think about, whatever you want to talk about, it is serious. It's not about frivolities. And I don't think it's anything that you really want to happen, that you really want to happen in a public sense. I think that it may be a time with Mercury square Saturn where things have to be thought about in secret or discussed in secret. I think that is possible. You don't want to tell the whole world what you're thinking. In fact, you don't really want to engage with the world at all, because it seems to you to be unnecessary. Though I think some Capricorns are nonetheless going to be concerned about their image. And we have a quintile between Venus and Saturn. So however much you feel that you want to withdraw, with that Venus quintile Saturn, you are thinking about how you are occurring to people. Maybe in quite a physical sense. Venus, because Venus is now in Capricorn, Venus is in your sign, so appearances do matter. You might not admit they matter, but I think they do matter with Venus in Capricorn. And so you're trying to stylize yourself. And maybe that's perhaps part of why you're not too comfortable about having a high-profile day, because you are in the process of stylizing yourself and how you occur to people, and things like, what you wear, what you look like. All of that could be important, and I suppose we might say that image matters. And I know that image is not a word that you normally associate with Capricorn, but perhaps you have worked out that in terms of getting what you want, getting what you need, image actually does matter. So although you'd like to convince yourself that people are unimportant, that their views don't matter, privately you do understand that people do matter. And okay, they might not matter today, but tomorrow, the next day, I think they are going to matter, and that might be why you are starting to think about image, even if you don't want to think about it, even if you think it's in some way beneath you. Aquarius, you probably benefit by the fact that the moon is moving from Pisces to Aries. I think that with the moon moving into Aries, okay, moon might not move into Aries until late in the day if you're in Australia or New Zealand, but at some stage or another, the moon will move into Aries. And so with the moon moving into Aries, I think that you're going to be quite positive, quite communicative. There are lots of things you're going to say, and I think that people are going to listen to you. And the moon doesn't just move into Aries, it makes a conjunction to the North Node, it also makes a trine to Mars. So I think, Aquarius, you're going to be able to present yourself in a very sort of powerful way. And I think also, the things you say will be noticed. So do work out what you're going to say, and don't just say things for the sake of it. I mean, it's easy to say things for the sake of it, perhaps with Moon trine Mars, but you do have to consider your audience. Not everyone can handle you, and not everyone can handle the raw, unadulterated message, especially as we've got Mercury square Saturn. So Saturn represents you. Mercury represents, I suppose, you, the communicator. The things you feel you need to say, and also the things you feel you need to think about. But Mercury square Saturn, it just may be that some of the things you say don't go down well, but that shouldn't put you off. I mean, you have got lots to say, and a lot of what you say is going to be very interesting, and people are going to want to hear you, and they're going to listen, and they're going to follow your lead. But it's just a good idea not to get too carried away, because at some stage that Mercury square Saturn may make itself felt, and you go too far, and you say something perhaps that is unacceptable, and it kind of spoils things. Also, we could be talking about the written word. So with Mercury square Saturn, be very careful what you communicate in terms of, I suppose, emails, text messages. Once you press the button, you can't take it back. And it's possible that you send an email or a text message and you almost immediately regret it. Now, it may be that it doesn't matter, that you're regretting something that is of no consequence. I mean, people get emails and text messages all the time, but sometimes a word out of place can cause a lot of offense. So, think carefully before you press the send button today. And I don't want to suggest that you shouldn't communicate. I think it's very important you communicate, but make sure that the filter is on good form. Read something, always read something over. Just read it again. And I suppose if you're talking, that's a little more difficult, but just pause for a split second before you say something, just to make sure that you're not causing needless offense. And, you shouldn't forget, Aquarius, that, Mars is Mars is in Leo, Mars is in your opposite sign. So, this is a time in general where relationships, of all kinds, it can be a little bit tempestuous. People can be sensitive, you can be sensitive, and I suppose with the moon trine Mars, that may actually increase the sensitivity. You may be able to get through to someone very easily, very quickly, but perhaps too quickly. You say something, your intention is for someone to understand you, and they may indeed understand you, but they may understand you more than expected, and the consequences of their hyper understanding may not be entirely fortunate. And at the same time, you have to understand that some people are actually under a lot of pressure. They might not give the impression of being under pressure, but I think they are under pressure. Some people are actually feeling trapped and a little bit nervous. They see there are big things going on around them and they don't know how to respond. And so they could be oversensitive because they're under pressure. And so perhaps, Aquarius, you should make an effort to understand what might be bothering people, and don't be fooled by surface appearances. Someone might be quite sort of calm on the surface, but deep down there may be things really bothering them, and perhaps if you say the wrong thing, that could really stir things up. And in terms of how you present yourself, Aquarius, I think it's actually a good idea if you made a special effort to be calm and conciliatory and pleasant. I think that pleasantness will not come immediately to you. You're not going to wake up today and feel that you are a wonderfully pleasant, nice person. I mean, you're an Aquarius. You like to do things your own way, and you can be a bit abrupt, perhaps because you're focusing too much on ideas and focusing less on feelings, but you can be abrupt. And you can say things, as I've already been discussing, that can upset people. And so what you might want to do, Aquarius, is to make a special effort to change the way you occur to people. I mean, it's all very contrived. It's not very natural, but it's something you might want to make a special effort to do, and make a real attempt to create a pleasant style, a style of of pleasantness, where you seem nice, where you seem accommodating. It might be totally fake, but it may be necessary at the moment. It may give you the best chance of getting on with people and making the right impression. Pisces, the moon is moving out of your sign, and it's moving into Aries. And I suppose you could say, with the moon moving into Aries, you might be thinking a little bit about what you have and what you don't have. I mean, Aries in the Pisces chart is a sign which is often about possessions and indeed money. And it may be that you want things. You want them now. And perhaps there's some item you feel you've just got to have it. You almost don't feel complete if you don't have it. I don't know if that's the right thing to just spend money on something just because you feel you need it. Of course, you don't necessarily have to spend money on it. There are ways of getting hold of things. You can find them. You can beg. You can borrow. Whatever. So ask yourself what you want today on a sort of in a material sense. And I think there's generally a way of getting hold of it, and I think there's a right way of getting hold of things and there's a wrong way. And I think you can use or at least find the right way of doing it. And as far as money is concerned, many Pisceans might want to put some effort and energy into money, making money, perhaps, getting a hold of money. Think about money. I mean, don't just totally neglect the issue. It's simple. I mean, it is simple at the moment. The financial challenges that you might have are just easy. You know what needs to be done. You know what should be avoided. It's all really very straightforward. So that's one way of looking at today. We also have a square aspect between Mercury and Saturn, and whether this Mercury square Saturn is a good thing or a bad thing kind of depends. Might depend on who you are, might depend on what your sign is. And I think from a perspective of a Pisces, there are a number of ways of looking at this, but I think Mercury square Saturn could actually be quite useful, because it's just so in keeping with who you are at the moment, this aspect. The challenge for Pisces right now, ever since Saturn moved into your sign at the beginning of 2023, has been to organize yourself, streamline yourself, making sure that everything is in order. And so with Mercury square Saturn, there is the challenge here to just make sure everything is in place. Make sure you understand things, and also make sure other people understand things, and using your words in a very specific way. You don't just say the first thing that comes to mind. You construct sentences and statements that are designed to make an impression, are designed to get a particular result. And from a perspective of other people, you may actually come over as being quite tough and no nonsense. And I think that's good. And so, Pisces, you can have a clear idea about what you want and how you want to achieve it. And I think you can get help and you can get support. And not everyone is going to immediately want to help you out, but they can be persuaded. And I think you are in a way quite persuasive at the moment. You can use the discipline of that Mercury square Saturn, getting your point across, but also the sensitivity of your sign. You are a Pisces. You understand the tides, you understand the emotional tides, and because of that, I do really think that you can be quite powerful, and I think you can be quite persuasive. Now, as far as close relationships are concerned, we also have to think about that Mercury square Saturn could have an impact on the people close to you, partners, loved ones, and so forth. And it may be that some people are not particularly optimistic. People you have to deal with in your daily life and in your personal life, they're not optimistic in many ways. Perhaps things have happened that have upset them, or may have tried to sort of convince them that there's no point because it's going to end in failure anyway. And this is a situation that you might want to think about how you're going to deal with it. What is the best way of addressing it? And you don't necessarily want people to continue being negative. And I think that you need to talk to people, find out why they're negative, and I think in many cases come up with solutions. And I think you're going to be quite good at coming up with solutions. there's going to be something sort of quite practical and sort of no nonsense about you. Saturn is in Pisces. Saturn is in mixed reception with Venus. Saturn is in the exaltation of Venus because Saturn's in Pisces, and Venus is in a sign ruled by Saturn. So there's that mixed reception between Venus and Saturn and that. So I think that you can be positive, but also realistic and down to earth. And it's not just about telling people everything's going to be fine. It's instead you actually look at what is bothering people and you try to sort of break it all down. And when you actually break it down, you can maybe persuade them that actually there isn't a great deal to worry about. So overall, Pisces, I think it's a day which is quite practical and possibly quite materialistic. And, when you have to sort of address everyday issues in a no-nonsense way, I think that other people are going to matter. I think that you can be quite influential. And, I think that you have the capacity to get people to shift their thinking, from a sort of a negative approach to something more positive. Now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. And so I asked the question, what will Tuesday be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 14, which is possession in great measure. Now, it could be argued that of the 64 hexagrams, that 14 is the best, or one of the best. I mean, no one shouldn't say that about the I Ching. That's sort of a very Western approach to think that one thing is better than another, but it's a really nice hexagram. As its name implies, possession in great measure. We have a lot in our possession. It may talk about two things. It may talk about what we possess already, or it might be about what we might possess in the future. And of course, when we're talking about possession, we're not just talking about money in the bank or our property, or, for example, it might be about our abilities, our talents, our knowledge, our friends, our family. All of these can be regarded as our possessions, the things we have. And I think that the I Ching with this hexagram is perhaps asking us to count our blessings. At the very least, we may feel that we don't have much. I suppose it depends on your situation. But in fact, if you look at things, you perhaps have more than you realize. And again, it's just not just about material things. It's about everything you have, your knowledge and your experience. So things are not as bad as they seem, or perhaps I'm not saying they do seem bad, but you might be in a situation where you feel things could be better. But with possession in great measure, it's asking you to really appreciate what you have. But possession in great measure is also suggesting that you can get more. Whatever it is you're looking for. Is it more money? Is it more knowledge? Is it more friends? Is it more appreciation? So that's possession in great measure, and I think it is a fortunate hexagram, and I think that should say something about today and how the day starts. I know if you've looked at my forecast of the 12 signs, at times I have been a little bit negative today. I mean, with Mercury square Saturn, for example. But this hexagram is giving us a different view of the day. Now, there are two moving lines. The fourth line from the bottom moves and the top line. Now, the fourth line from the bottom moving is a little bit of a warning here. And it is saying, for example, that we have to be careful about who is around us. And one way the I Ching looks at it is in terms of being surrounded by rich and powerful neighbours. That is the Wilhelm version of the translation. We are if we're surrounded by rich and powerful neighbours, then we have to be careful how we go. We don't want to fall out with people who have more than what we have, and we need to be very modest. And there is the advice here that we don't want to show off. Absolutely mustn't show off. And we must accept what we have. We have something, whatever our possessions are, but we don't want to tell people about our possessions. We don't want to boast. Remember, possessions can be about our knowledge, and we might think that we've got something special, but it's not, in the first instance, a time to be talking about it. We really do need to sort of keep it to ourselves, be modest, and accept that some of the people around us do have power and perhaps wealth, and we don't want to fall out with them. We don't want to make a fool of ourselves, and whatever, we just must not be ostentatious. Then the fourth line, the top line moves. And very often in the I Ching, the top line can be rather difficult. But I think in this case, the top line actually works quite well, because it talks about heavenly blessings. It's saying that we're doing things right. The universe is on our side. The universe is prepared to help us. And whatever we work towards, provided we've got a good heart, we will be successful. And from a sort of a hierarchical point of view, perhaps if we're working for another person, perhaps in terms of these rich and powerful people, I don't know who they might be. I suppose they could be employers, someone we're working for, it might be. But we do our best. We don't boast about it, and we impress. And as a result, I suppose, we might be in a position where we can gain more stuff, whatever that stuff might be. So this is a very fortunate hexagram. We've got two lines moving, and so it does transition to another fortunate hexagram. It transitions to hexagram number 11, which is peace. Everything is in the right place. Everything is flowing. And so this is, the best place to end up, isn't it? So it seems that if we do things right, we can end the day feeling that everything's moving, we're able to use our knowledge and experience, and I suppose if money is important to us and possessions are important to us, we will feel comfortable with what we have, and perhaps we can gain more stuff if that's important. Yeah, I think that can happen. But whatever happens, I think we're just going to end the day feeling that everything is calm, everything is moving, and that we are in the right place. And my apologies for being so positive. I think there's always a problem about being positive. I think the problem about being positive is that it sort of creates expectations, doesn't it? You don't want to make people think that things are going to be better than they are, and they think everything is going to be fine. Or, I don't know, I suppose with possession in great measure, we were talking about money, and people might get excited about the prospect of making money, and then nothing happens. So, I'm trying not to be deliberately positive, but I have to say that, given these two hexagrams, it does look as if it's going to be a good day. And now it's time to look at Venus in Capricorn. And, Venus in Capricorn is... Venus in Capricorn, on its own, it is a bit generic, isn't it? Can we really say anything useful about Venus in Capricorn on its own? Venus in Capricorn obviously goes into Capricorn once a year. And, when you're looking at a chart, you always have to consider whatever the planets are surrounding it. And just looking at Venus in Capricorn on its own can be really tough. So Venus represents, I suppose, our relationship to the outside world. It can be a social planet. It can be a planet about relationships. When I say a social planet, I don't mean a social planet as in Jupiter and Saturn, because Jupiter and Saturn can be categorized as social planets, and moon through to Mars as personal planets. So yeah, Venus is a personal planet, but it can be about other people, how we relate to other people. And so with Venus in Capricorn, there may be something a little bit understated about it. And you might even wonder, why is Venus in Capricorn not unfortunate? It is fine. Venus in Capricorn is great. But if you think about the moon is considered to be in its detriment in Capricorn. And then, Moon, Venus, they are both female planets. They're both very sensitive planets. They're receptive planets. Yet Moon doesn't work particularly well in Capricorn, but Venus actually works fine in Capricorn. So that's something that perhaps we need to think about. And as with Moon in Capricorn, there can be something a little bit contractual about Venus in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn, because Venus is in an earth sign, is thinking about how can it benefit? Where is the benefit? Is there a possibility of benefit? And so that may influence how Venus in Capricorn actually behaves. So Venus in Capricorn can be a bit reserved, and at least traditionally in a textbook, Venus in Capricorn is reserved. It can be analysing sort of social interactions perhaps in quite a material way, not wanting to do anything perhaps overly dramatic, and maybe in certain cases Venus in Capricorn can be a little concerned about status. Who is Venus in Capricorn hanging out with? What impact does this have? So Venus in Capricorn might take the view that some people should be associated with because they might be materially useful, and other people should not be associated with. That is one way of looking at it. Venus in Capricorn is also perhaps about aesthetics. Venus is the planet of beauty. So with Venus in Capricorn, can be about what is beautiful. That might be the question that Venus in Capricorn is asking. Venus in Capricorn, unlike, say, for example, Venus in Sagittarius, is not ostentatious, or all things being equal is not ostentatious. Venus in Capricorn appreciates things which are perhaps simple, maybe even traditional. So from an artistic point of view, you might say Venus in Capricorn, might prefer the old masters rather than abstract and modern art. That could be an approach. In terms of decoration, simplicity, things need to be solid and unpretentious. So that is certainly a way that Venus in Capricorn could work. And of course, Venus is a planet which is feminine. It's regarded as feminine. It's a planet that in a female chart is more likely to be owned. So a woman with Venus in Capricorn, that's her Venus in Capricorn. She's perhaps less likely to project it, and it's more likely to be part of who she is. Whereas a man with Venus in Capricorn, that may say something about the kind of woman he might be attracted to. At least in theory, I'm not saying in practice, but a man with Venus in Capricorn is perhaps going to look for a woman who has of a sort of Capricorn nature. That is how it could work. So those are a few thoughts about Venus in Capricorn. I think it is really difficult to generalize with Venus in Capricorn, because you just have to look at the whole chart. So let's start to look at Venus in Capricorn, and some of these people that I'm going to be looking at aren't remotely Venus in Capricorn. Not that I know about them very well, but let's start with someone who I don't think it strikes me as being at all Venus in Capricorn, and that is Alex Jones of InfoWars fame. So he was born on February the 11th, 1974. There's his chart. And you can see that he has Venus in Capricorn, Venus at 25, 26 Capricorn. Again, don't have his time of birth. His Venus is retrograde. And how is that Venus in Capricorn going to work? Well, I think we might have to consider what's happening to it in the rest of the chart. And you can see that his Venus in Capricorn is square Uranus in Libra. And so Venus in Capricorn, on its own, might be someone who is trying his hardest to make money, make connections, make the right connections, and that all seems sort of straightforward. But Venus is retrograde, and Venus retrograde, but retrograde can have an influence. It may give him perhaps an unusual view, a different view, and then Venus square Uranus, that can sort of shake things up. He may be attracted to people and groups that are sort of unusual, that don't follow the main narrative. And we shouldn't also forget that Venus represents money. And so Venus in Capricorn is someone who regards money perhaps as being important, but it's retrograde. Does he always have a right approach to money? And then Venus square Uranus. This could be, in this case, someone who, despite his hard work, finds that he loses a lot of money. And I suppose, with the fallout from Sandy Hook, where he made these allegations about Sandy Hook and the Sandy Hook parents, which he doubled down on, and so he was the result of he ended up having to pay millions and millions with that Venus square Uranus. So that might be how it works, and perhaps Venus retrograde, perhaps in Capricorn, he perhaps wanted to look after his own interests, but tried so hard that he messed himself up. So that could be the way it works. And also, we don't know where his moon is. I mean, because I don't have his time of birth. I know some people say they know his time of birth, but moon at 25 Libra at noon, I suppose it could be in Scorpio, but it's likely that moon is conjunct Uranus at some level. So Moon conjunct Uranus, Venus square Uranus really shakes things up. So perhaps he's not a typical Venus in Capricorn kind of person, because we have to consider the impact of Uranus, which is a very different energy from what one would normally associate Venus in Capricorn with. Now, if you are a politician, it might actually be quite useful to have Venus in Capricorn. So the Prime Minister of Australia, Anthony Albanese, has Venus in Capricorn. And I don't know much about him. I don't know anything about him. I mentioned him in a video quite recently. I was looking at the comments. Apparently there's been some scandal about him and payments, and something to do with air tickets, and him benefiting from airlines buying him seats. Is that right? I don't know. Something like that. And he has Venus in Capricorn. So Venus conjunct the South Node in Capricorn. So here is someone, Venus in Capricorn, he's a politician. How did he get to be a successful politician? I suppose if you're a politician, you have to get to know people. You have to know which people are important, which people to hang out with, which people not to hang out with, who are the important contacts. So he sort of works his way through the system. But Venus is conjunct the South Node. So Venus conjunct the South Node may suggest that people who he thinks are his friends, or thinks could be useful. He thinks they're useful, but actually they could end up damaging his reputation. And so there is a real reputational issue there with that Venus conjunct the South Node. But it doesn't take away from perhaps what it means to have Venus in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn is someone who is trying to be successful, is making choices about who are the best people to know and which people to avoid. Another politician who has Venus in Capricorn, who's actually got a Venus return at the moment, is Alice Weidel. Alice Weidel is one of the heads, I think they have co-heads, do they? But she's one of the heads of the Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, AfD, isn't that right? So this is a right-wing party in Germany, and a lot of people seem to be very afraid of it. They're saying it's far right, it's anti-immigrant, and so on. And she's in control, she's in charge, and she has Venus in Capricorn. So Venus in Capricorn, it's not just Venus in Capricorn, it's Venus conjunct the solstice point. It's very close to 0 degrees Capricorn. So that means the solstice point is about the world at large. It's about the nation. And so for a political figure, it's very nice to have Venus in Capricorn because it allows you to reach a wider audience. And Venus in Capricorn, of course, is quite sensible. Of course, some people would say that her policies are not sensible, but that's their view. And so she sensibly does what she has to do in order to get political power, and that's what she has done. And I would have thought with her Venus return, which is happening right now, I think, over the last couple of days, this is an important time for her, remembering that the German coalition is falling apart. We're likely, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, to have federal elections in January. And in terms of the news, I looked up her name, Alice Weidel, in the news to see what the news is about. Well, there's news about the AfD and the elections. There's also news about her reaction to the election of Donald Trump. She thinks it's a good thing, and she regards Donald Trump as being a role model for Germany. And I think inevitably she said, well, let's make Germany great again. So she's in the news, I think, and I think that Venus in Capricorn seems to work well for her, although I don't know a great deal about her. Now, Venus in Capricorn does have a certain harshness to it. It can have a certain harshness, not always, but it can. And that harshness perhaps is about its transactionality, being transactional, thinking about, what needs to be done. And of course, what role people can have. People are perhaps the means to achieve a particular end. And again, I suppose if you're a politician, that's important. And if you're a politician making life and death decisions, Dick Cheney, him and his daughter Liz have endorsed Kamala Harris. That didn't seem to work too well, but they did. And Dick Cheney has Venus in Capricorn. So Venus in Capricorn can be someone who is tough, who is unemotional, can look at the reality of the things and just they do what is necessary, and it doesn't matter about the consequences. So Venus in Capricorn, you could say that the means justify the end. And so he has Venus in Capricorn, Venus trine Uranus. Of course, we associate him with the 2003 Gulf War and considered to be a neocon. We do what is necessary. And of course, it's the Gulf War. It sort of supports American oil industry. Again, we do what's necessary, don't we? It may be that hundreds of thousands of civilians died in Iraq. But hold on, I mean, look on the plus side. I mean, it's good for American oil companies. It's good for America's strategic interests and economic interests. I mean, let's get our priorities right. I mean, that could be how Venus in Capricorn works. And Venus in Capricorn, can, go further. I mean, let's look at Budanov, talking about Ukraine. Budanov, I forget what his first name is, but Budanov is a general in the Ukraine, associated with intelligence, and he's very young. He's only born in 1986, so he's still in his 30s, and he's a general. And he's been associated with acts of terrorism against Russia, against people perhaps in occupied Ukraine, as they would say, occupied Ukraine. The Russians would say liberated Ukraine, who are supporting the Russians and acts of terrorism. And he's got Venus in Capricorn. Does he lose any sleep over it, of innocent people dying? Venus in Capricorn, at its worst, probably doesn't lose much sleep. We have to do what has to be done. With Dick Cheney, with Venus in Capricorn, it is necessary. And of course, in his case, he's got Sun conjunct Venus as well. So that kind of makes it even harsher. The combust Venus. I mean, Venus Capricorn combust represents someone who might come over as being quite heartless because it has to be done. Might say something about his wife. His wife, she was receiving treatment, I think, was it 6 months ago or a year ago, fairly recently, for heavy metal poisoning. And I don't know how she got heavy metal poisoning, but maybe we can see that somehow in the Sun-Venus conjunction in Capricorn. And someone else with Venus in Capricorn, someone who we'd see a different side to Venus in Capricorn, would be Steve Jobs, one of the founders of Apple. So he had Venus in Capricorn, and Venus opposition Jupiter in Cancer, Venus opposition Uranus. So with Steve Jobs, we should start to be thinking about the aesthetic side of Venus in Capricorn. Clearly, Steve Jobs had views about aesthetics and design and what things should look like. I believe that his first job, or what he studied, he was studying design or something like that. I mean, I'm not an expert on Steve Jobs, but Venus in Capricorn likes, I suppose, to have a certain amount of simplicity. Things to be removed. You don't want to have too many features. I've never owned an Apple product, by the way, so I'm not an expert on them. But Venus opposition Uranus would be challenging these things. You want to challenge the status quo. I mean, I know he's using existing technology, and I mean, but certainly in an aesthetic sense, he's an innovator. And I suppose the Apple computers, Venus opposition Uranus, I suppose there is an innovation there. But we do particularly think about the aesthetics with that Venus in Capricorn, and saying something about what to him looks good, and removing things which are unnecessary. And that does seem to be an Apple thing, not needing things, and you have sort of things which are simple. So Venus in Capricorn is also about control. And wanting to control people. They get involved in Apple products, and they're stuck with Apple products, and there are all sorts of controls if you become a user of the Apple suite. So that may also be how Venus in Capricorn works. Now, Steve Jobs has many imitators, and perhaps one of his most infamous imitators, who has Venus in Capricorn, is Elizabeth Holmes. So Elizabeth Holmes was obsessed, or may still be obsessed, with Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs was known for his black polo turtleneck shirt or whatever, and she imitated him, and she had Venus in Capricorn, Venus conjunct Jupiter in Capricorn. So she set up this company, this blood testing company, which basically produced a product which didn't work, but managed to get a lot of money off people. That might be Venus in Capricorn, able to get a lot of money off people, and just finding she can do it. It's easy. Perhaps Venus is widely conjunct Jupiter as well. That might have an impact also, because Jupiter in Capricorn. A lot of people have Jupiter in Capricorn. There's nothing wrong with having Jupiter in Capricorn. I mean, some bad people have Jupiter in Capricorn. Hitler had Jupiter in Capricorn. It's true. I think Prince Harry, he's got Jupiter in Capricorn. So, if you're a public figure, that Jupiter in Capricorn can be more prominent. But perhaps as she became a public figure, Jupiter in Capricorn, it can become success for the sake of success. That is a danger with Jupiter in Capricorn. You want to be successful, not because there's any vision, but you just need to be successful and forget the consequences. And that Jupiter in Capricorn may be how it all worked out with her blood testing product. Let's get the money. Let's get the customers. Let's not worry too much about whether the thing works. That could be Jupiter in Capricorn, but her Venus in Capricorn, Venus in Capricorn is transactional, able to get people investing in her company. No doubt helped by the fact that she had Venus in Capricorn sextile Mars in Scorpio. So she must have been quite sort of charming and attractive as she looked for new investors. So that was helpful, but it didn't take away from the fact that the product didn't actually work. Now, Venus in Capricorn can, in a female chart, represent the kind of man a woman is looking for. That's absolutely possible. And 2 Nazi wives had Venus in Capricorn. One Nazi wife I don't want to spend too much time on, because I've looked at her chart quite a lot of times before, is Magda Goebbels. She's the wife of Joseph Goebbels, or was the wife of Joseph Goebbels. Joseph Goebbels was her second husband, and she had perhaps a knack of choosing rich and influential spouses. I think her first husband was rich. I think he might have been Jewish as well. But she married him. He probably was the right person to marry at a particular time. He was convenient, and Venus in Capricorn, that's what she was looking for. Oh, and like Elizabeth Holmes, Magda Goebbels had Venus in Capricorn and Jupiter in Capricorn. She had Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. I mean, a wide Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. And so, that is quite transactional. Looking for a man who's going to give her what she wanted. Then things change in Germany, and who's the man to go for? Well, it's Joseph Goebbels, rising figure in the Nazi party. So she marries him. She has children with him, and then she kills all her children at the end, which is kind of interesting. But not as interesting. It's very tragic. But you would have thought Venus in Capricorn at the end would have started to look after her own interests. As the Russians were closing in on Berlin, why didn't Magda Goebbels, with her Venus in Capricorn, flee to the west? She could have done. She had the opportunity to, but she didn't. She stayed in Berlin to the very end. Well, Venus in Capricorn only worked up to a point. And I think at some level, her new moon in Scorpio also started to kick in right at the end. And so new moon in Scorpio at its worst, stinging itself to death, killing her family, poisoning her children, and her husband committing suicide. So there was a limit to the self-interest of Venus in Capricorn, or maybe she started to perceive her self-interest in a different way. And another Nazi woman who also committed suicide was Eva Braun. So Eva Braun, I don't think she was a particularly complex or sophisticated woman. I think she worked in a photographer's office, and that's how she met Hitler, and Hitler was overwhelmed by her, and I suppose she was overwhelmed by him. and Venus in Capricorn. She was looking after her own interests, and I suppose Venus in Capricorn, she liked, I suppose, the trappings of wealth, which of course she would have had once she was hitched up with Hitler. Of course, they didn't marry until right at the end, just before they killed each other, or just before she didn't kill him. I mean, just before they committed suicide anyway. So why was Eva Braun so attracted to Hitler? Well, kind of fate, I suppose, brought them together. But if you look at Eva Braun's chart in the middle and you take Hitler's chart on the outer wheel, there's Eva Braun's Venus in Capricorn, and Hitler had Moon in Capricorn at 6 Capricorn, only 2 degrees off her Capricorn, and then his Jupiter was exactly conjunct her Venus. So from Hitler's perspective, Moon in Capricorn was, I suppose, what he was looking for in a woman, and Eva Braun had her Venus conjunct his Moon in Capricorn. And so she was what he was looking for. A straightforward German girl, I don't know, but his Jupiter as well was on his Venus. From her perspective, Venus in Capricorn, she meets someone who's got Jupiter exactly on her Venus. Well, that's great. He's going to give her everything he wants. And I'm probably running out of time here, but let's look at one more chart. RFK. I don't know what time he's born. This time of 5:32 p.m. is widely given for RFK, and he has Venus in Capricorn, and it's difficult to say what that Venus in Capricorn is about. But with his Venus in Capricorn, I suppose he is thinking about other people, perhaps, and how they treat him. I mean, I suppose he goes through life, high-profile life. He meets lots of different people, and there are going to be some radical changes on the way. And you might say that Venus in Capricorn, in the end, Venus in Capricorn was looking after its own interests, and also there's a sense of ego. I mean, that is important. I mean, it's important for all of us. So Venus in Capricorn, opposition Uranus, sudden changes in allegiance. And I suppose Venus in Capricorn gets slighted by the Democrat Party, getting rejected by the Democrat Party, not being allowed to go through a proper primary, trying to keep him off of ballots. And so it's perhaps, not surprising that Venus opposition Uranus in Capricorn, he has to look after his own interests. He has to look after, what's important to him. And so he endorses Donald Trump. And of course, by endorsing Donald Trump, it's likely that he's going to get some kind of role. I mean, I don't know whether he's going to be in the cabinet or not, but he's not going to be forgotten, at least in the first instance. And I suppose you might also see Venus in Capricorn, Venus in terms of, in a positive way, you might see Venus as being about health and about the environment and about nature and earth. Remember, he was an environmental lawyer. I'm not quite sure how that squares with him, for example, joining Trump's cabinet. I think he might be disappointed. I don't think Trump is great for the environment. But Venus in Capricorn, opposition Uranus, you could see that in terms of the environment. Venus conjunct Capricorn, conjunct the North Node. This is perhaps what is important to him, or what was originally important to him. But he's also got Uranus conjunct the South Node. And I know a lot of people listening to this are, favorably inclined towards RFK, but it may be that in terms of his destiny, what he's supposed to be doing in this life, the revolutionary and unexpected nature of him, Uranus conjunct the South Node, for example, endorsing Trump and sort of embracing certain aspects of Trump's ideology of Uranus conjunct the South Node, maybe, that may not be the right course for him. I mean, that's a possibility. I'm not giving any opinion here on RFK, but I just thought I would thought I would mention that. And finally, I'm not going to look at any events. I'm just going to look at one country. Just a reminder that England, assuming you say that England was born on Christmas Day 1066 at noon when William I was crowned. This chart, by the way, is set for the Gregorian date, but December the 31st, 1066 is the same as December the 25th, 1066. So England has Venus conjunct, had Venus in Capricorn. And that may say something about England's, I suppose, reserve, perhaps. I mean, it has a reputation for being a reserved country. And perhaps perfidious Albion, England always looking after its own interests. At least that's what some of England's enemies say. And in terms of Venus in England's diplomacy, who it relates to, how it tries to assert its control. Again, Venus in Capricorn. And we know that Venus in Capricorn works quite well because one of the sort of most important events in royal history recent royal history was the abdication of Edward VIII, as a result of his relationship with Wallis Simpson. So this was a marriage issue, a divorce issue. At the time of the announcement of his abdication, Venus was at 29 degrees Capricorn. So that there was a Venus opposition Pluto exactly on England's Venus. So that seems to work. And of course, at the moment, we have Pluto going, Pluto's pretty much on England's Venus exactly. And I wonder how that works, Pluto being on Venus in Capricorn. I think part of Pluto on Venus in Capricorn represented Kate's illness, Princess Catherine's illness. And that was happening as Pluto was conjunct England's Venus. Venus represents the women in society, and I suppose the woman in society that gets most attention, and particularly now Queen Elizabeth II is dead, would be Princess Catherine. But Venus can also be about diplomacy and how you conduct foreign relations. And of course, with Trump's election, you might see Pluto conjunct England's Venus in Capricorn as perhaps turning everything upside down. Maybe the British government, Labour government, were really hoping Trump was going to lose, but he didn't. And maybe they kidded themselves into thinking that he was going to lose. And you've got all sorts of problems. You've got the foreign minister having said a lot of really nasty things about Donald, and difficult to take back. So there is the idea, perhaps, with Pluto conjunct Venus, that from a foreign policy and diplomatic point of view, England has got a lot on its plate. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about Venus in Capricorn. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you to like it. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.